Hey WizKid, did you hear the news?
No, I didn't, MrMostDaysOff. What's up?
Well, right now, for the entire month of February, you get 20% off on all orders at popthreads.com just by using our discount code Simpsons at checkout.
That's horrible.
No, man, that's great news. What do you mean?
They're only going to give you 80% of a t-shirt? The humanity.
No, WizKid, you get all of the t-shirt. You're just going to save 20% on the order. You still get the whole enchilada.
Whole enchilada.
No, there's no enchilada. I'm talking about t-shirts. You get to save money on your t-shirts at popthreads.com. You're going to get the whole t-shirt enchilada.
Whole t-shirt enchilada.
Just go to popthreads.com and use our discount code Simpsons at checkout so you can save 20% on all orders for the entire month of February.
Popthreads.com. Note, popthreads.com does not sell enchiladas.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the Best Darn Diddly Review Show. This is a weekly podcast for anyone who loves The Simpsons or ever has loved The Simpsons, hosted by two dudes that grew up on The Simpsons. My name is Miles, better known as MrMostDaysOff, and today we are going deep with our review of Deep Space Homer. And as always, I am not going at this alone. Joining me, your co-host with the most, Richie the WizKid. How you doing today, Rich?
You know, when you said we were going deep, and then you said I'm not going at this alone, my mind went to a completely different place.
It went exactly where I wanted it to go.
Oh, that's even more dirty. But I am fine and dandy like sour candy, just as usual. This is a long-time favorite episode of mine since I was a kid. It's going to be interesting to see how I felt about it going back as an adult watching it. But, you know, very fond memories of this episode. Pretty much my entire life.
Interesting. I feel like that was a little foreshadowing for Richie's inner feelings, or deep feelings, we might say, to keep it on theme.
The whimsical WizKid. But anyways, we can come up with names for other shows later. For now, I will throw it back to you. The man, the myth, the marshmallow truck. It is Miles.
And pillow factories. Damn the luck. Oh, that's such a good gag. And I found out a little bit of trivia about that scene too from the director's commentary. We'll get there. Let's go ahead and start from the beginning. This episode is Deep Space Homer. It originally aired on February 24th, 1994.
Oh, so close.
Just one day off of the WizKid's birthday. That's right. This episode was one of the longer running ones. We know this because there was short credits, and that means we get no chalk gag on this episode. We do get a repeat couch gag where we see that fat man sitting on the couch that I say looks familiar. I am now starting to think that it just must be me remembering watching these as a kid or, whenever I saw them last. And for whatever reason, I associate him with being a character from something else. But it is just the fat guy sitting on the couch, and all the Simpsons have to squeeze in place.
What's the theory where people remember things differently, and it's because it's from an alternate universe?
Oh, the Mandela Effect. Yeah, shout out to Secret Trans podcast over there, Secret Transmission.
This might be a new Mandela Effect situation here.
Dude, I still am not over the Berenstein Bears one. Like, that one is going to forever trip me out, but that's for a whole nother podcast. Literally, there are other podcasts about that. Like we mentioned, the Secret Transmission podcast.
For me, the episode length on this one was kind of odd because I noticed that it was a little long too, but the episode plays really fast. So I guess that maybe it's just because it's a fun episode.
I think there's the combination of that it's fun, and I don't remember what episode it was now, but it was just a few episodes back we had the same discussion where it seems when they have a very focused single plot line, the episode seems to really fly by. I think it might have been Bart Gets Famous, if I remember correctly, but I might be wrong on that.
Almost like you're waiting for it to cut away to another plot, but it never does, so you forget that it's one story and it's already over by then.
It goes really fast. Even the act breaks, it's just like, whoa. When we got to Act 3, as I was watching it, I was just like, do they even have time to tell the rest of the story? But it's just because it goes so quickly. But again, that's not to say it's not a fantastic episode. This one is great, honestly. It's got Merkin written all over it, and I've got some fun stories to tell about that. But let's go ahead and get a little ways into the episode first. This one starts out great as we hear kind of grim music playing over the power plant speakers. And we get Smithers announcing attention, and he doesn't instruct the workers just to go immediately to the main yard. He tells them they need to trudge immediately to the main yard for the mandatory Worker of the Week award festivities. And it is just the most subdued, almost upset or angry. I mean, they just clearly have no desire to be forced to go to this fucking mockery of an award show or an award event, whatever you want to call it.
Once a week, that's kind of excessive. I mean, you do the employee of the month, but you don't need to do a weekly one at a huge company like that.
I don't know. If you're getting a dope prize, I'm all for it. Increase your odds. I mean, Homer needs all the odds he can get, right? But actually, on the way to this award ceremony, there's this great bit because everybody has to go through a like Total Recall style X-ray machine. And at first, it's pretty normal stuff, you know, like they see an Uzi and a pistol, two kids posing.
Totally normal.
Totally normal. Two kids posing as an adult is one of my favorites. You see a trench coat with two kids piled on top of each other. But then you see what is very clearly a Neanderthal skeleton or whatever system. He's like hunched over, has a big old cranium, is kind of scratching his head in a Neanderthal-like manner. Only the people working this machine instantly recognize him and are just like, oh, hi, Homer.
Hey.
And they're just like, it's a very casual conversation for these folks.
Yeah, they couldn't see Homer at all. All they could see was the skeleton, but they just knew that it was Homer.
Hey, with a skeletal figure like that, you're going to recognize.
I mean, he's unbreakable, right?
As we get to the award ceremony, we already see Carl and Lenny waiting, and they're just complaining about how awful these award ceremonies are. I mean, after all, everyone has already won one, except for...
Hello? Well, today's the day for Homer J. I know I'm going to win this time.
Oh yeah? How come?
Union Rule 26. Every employee must win Worker of the Week at least once, regardless of gross incompetence, obesity, or rank odor.
I love how Homer just owns all of these qualities about himself.
I love how he actually read a rule in a book.
Yeah, that's actually the most out of characteristic thing in this entire episode. There was a pretty glaring animation mistake in this sequence. Did you happen to notice what happened?
What happened, Miles?
While Homer, Carl, and Lenny were having this conversation, everybody in the background, mid-conversation, it would seem, because some characters had their mouths wide open while others were shut, all of the background animation actually froze for several seconds.
I might have just thought it was whatever device I was watching The Simpsons on where it doesn't always have the best quality.
Wow.
My DVDs!
Yeah, well, my DVDs aren't scratched or don't have low connection speeds, so I didn't have that issue. And it was actually pointed out to me on the commentary because I did not notice the first time I watched through this episode, but it is very glaring once you've seen it. Once it's pointed out to you, you will forever see it from now on.
Way to ruin a classic Simpsons episode, Miles.
Yep, it's gone now. It's the worst one in the season.
And it's game.
So Smithers is there to make the announcement. He has his megaphone, and he's actually asking for an odd hush for Mr. Burns.
Compadres, it's imperative that we crush the freedom fighters before the start of the rainy season. And remember, a shiny new donkey for whoever brings me the head of Colonel Montoya.
Smithers leans over and whispers to Burns, telling him I guess he is not actually calling for the head of Colonel Montoya.
What? Oh, and by that I mean, of course, it's time for the Worker of the Week award. I can't believe we've overlooked this week's winner for so very, very long. We simply could not function without his tireless efforts. So, a round of applause for this inanimate carbon rod!
And cheers erupt, as apparently this carbon rod is very popular, and these things are all just a popularity contest after all. There is, however, one man in the crowd who is a little bit upset. In fact, Homer is quite angry. Oh, inanimate, huh? I'll show you inanimate. And then we get this great shot where Homer does freeze, but this time it is intentional, and he is stuck inanimately, essentially, not moving a muscle as the crowd walks away.
Poor Homer.
It is a sad situation for Homer, especially when he has to go home and face the music when his own kid is actually excited that he just got to see the carbon rod, and he really isn't that excited just to see Homer. Homer's really down in the dumps about this.
That means, first of all, Homer's probably expressed to his family on numerous occasions about the weekly Employee of the Week award or whatever. So you know that he was excited about it, and he probably thought when he woke up that day that it was his week and he was going to get it. And then also, the second note is, if his family knows about the rod is very important.
Well, and the rod is very important, as we'll find out, Richie.
Yeah, it's kind of an ironic Rod episode.
Not to be confused with Rod and Todd.
Yeah.
When Homer is clamoring for respect and Marge is trying to reassure him that the family does respect him, Bart is actually taking a moment to write "insert brain here" on the back of Homer's head. At first, this turns into just a giggle from Lisa and Bart, but as Homer starts to react to this drawing on the back of his head that he can't read, even Marge starts to laugh, and we see Homer doing his classic Three Stooges style of running around in circles screaming. Like I said, even Marge can't help but to laugh at this point, but unfortunately, this just keeps going on a little bit too long, to the point where the laughter from the family actually just turns to a sense of sadness as they realize just how much of an imbecile Homer really is.
Yeah, that's very, like you alluded to at the beginning of the episode, that felt like a very Merkin moment when they're just all kind of like, because it's almost dark, whether they recognize facially and emotionally that there is something wrong with Homer.
Yeah, it is a very dark joke. You're very right. With no luck from his family, Homer turns to the only place he finds respect.
Ah, TV respects me. It laughs with me, not at me. Click.
And as he turns the television on, there's literally a man on screen pointing straight through the fourth wall saying, "You stupid!" And then there's uncontrollable laughter at Homer's expense. Dope! They change the channel and we see a news report talking about what a great day it is for a live launch at Cape Canaveral in the Florida Peninsula.
That's correct, Tom. The lion's share of this flight will be devoted to the study of effects of weightlessness on tiny screws.
Unbelievable. And just imagine the logistics of weightlessness. And of course, this could have literally millions of applications here on Earth. Everything from watchmaking to watch repair.
Boring.
But as Homer tries to change the channel, the batteries fall out from the bottom.
No, the batteries!
The news report goes on to introduce the crew, but at this point, Homer is absolutely going into a panic. It would seem that the worst thing that could possibly happen to him in this moment would be being forced to watch the ever so boring space launch live from Cape Canaveral.
Well, I mean, there's three musketeers here, Miles. I mean, there's a mathematician, a different kind of mathematician, and a statistician.
That's true. This is captivating television as they're introducing the crew. Even Bart comes in and tries to help with Homer. He's like, "Oh no, not another boring space launch. Change the channel, change the channel."
I can't!
But Bart dives dramatically for the plug and rips it from the wall. And literally Homer and Bart have a sigh of relief because it would have been so traumatizing just to watch this boring television event.
It was a great one of those moments where Bart and Homer were kind of in sync, not realizing it, and it was a cool little father-son thing, kind of. With some action.
Lots of action. Over-the-top action for what's really going on, but that's what makes it so funny. We see over at Mission Control for this launch that things are not going well. An assistant comes in to a group of scientists and says, "Sir, we've run into a serious problem with the mission. These Nielsen ratings are the lowest ever." And he hands them a sheet of paper.
"Oh my god, we've been beaten by a Connie Chung Christmas."
So the important part of this space launch that we learn, at least from NASA's standpoint, is just how critically bad television ratings are becoming.
Well, and also NASA has failed in the key demographic of 18 to 49 white male viewers.
That's true. It's just not picking those up at all. NASA's best minds go to work to solve this critical issue. They are going to try to find a fresh angle to keep the public interested. They start to discuss things, trying to figure out what might be going wrong.
Maybe we should finally tell them the big secret, that all the chimps we sent into space came back super intelligent.
And we see that there's a chimpanzee wearing a suit, smoking a cigar on roller skates, who very calmly and politely says, "No, I don't think we'll be telling them that," before skating away down the hall.
We need a fresh angle to keep the public interested.
The public sees our astronauts as clean-cut, athletic go-getters. They hate people like that.
Well, who do they like?
And then we see a sequence showing some of the most popular characters on television in the early 90s. And oh boy, do they start with a good one. They tune into what seems to be an episode of Home Improvement. We see Tim the Tool Man Taylor. Oh. I did it! I supercharged my riding mower. And then he does his little grunt that I just butchered and immediately backs through the neighboring fence to where we know, of course, Wilson lives. Oh no! I've killed Wilson! Looks like it's back to jail for me. Oh. So, I did not know this, but I did learn from this episode doing a little research. This is a very much a jab at Tim Allen, the comedian behind Tim the Toolman Taylor.
Really, Miles?
I didn't know this story. Did you know it?
My dad told me when we watched him when I was a kid that he had been in prison for drug trafficking or something like that.
That is exactly correct. Before Tim Allen ever made it big with comedy, he actually spent 4 years in prison for drug trafficking. And he had committed the crimes in the 70s. I think he spent jail time in the 80s. But he got out and landed the role, got his stand-up, and managed to get the iconic role of Tim the Toolman Taylor, and the rest is history. Now he's just kind of a conservative jackass with a less funny show, but, that's for a different podcast.
But he was Santa Claus once, which is actually a trilogy about elves that are cannibals, but we can get into that later.
I need to watch the sequels, apparently. I love the first one, for what it's worth. That's a Christmas classic.
During Christmas, I read theories online where they say that the Santa Claus is the darkest trilogy in the existence of movies.
I'm going to have to look that up. That sounds fascinating. We also see another example of what America sees as their leading males on television. They tune into Married with Children, and we get a very whiny Peg asking Al for what Peg always asks Al for.
Al, let's have sex.
No, Peg. Which is literally the basis for that show, but I fucking love Married with Children. I don't know why. It's really dumb in so many ways.
It's not done yet.
It's not?
Flush.
Oh, fuck. I thought you meant the Married with Children, and you got me all excited for a second. That's the ultimate.
I meant the bit's not done.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I did forget. He just leans over and flushes a toilet, which is another staple of comedy in the 90s, of course. But damn it, my heart just went through an emotional roller coaster thinking that I was getting like a reunion of Married with Children.
No, Miles.
Flush.
Hey, you're getting a Friends movie. Just be happy about that.
Gasp, what?
I've heard from a not good source, because they've been talking about bringing Friends back for another season. I heard yesterday or the day before that apparently it's just going to be a movie, but that it's actually happening. I don't know how true that is. Again, the source is a very unreliable source, but they're super Friends nerds. So,
well, that makes me super confident that I'm getting that movie you just told me about for the first time. Man, I'm just learning all sorts of things about not The Simpsons on today's episode.
I did no research for that, so I don't know if it's true at all. But remember that you heard it here first if it's true, and remember that you didn't hear it here if it's not true.
Speaking of research, Richie, we're still having this meeting with the researchers and the scientists trying to figure out what they can do to get those ever so coveted Nielsen ratings back, because they're just not getting the people tuning in like they would in the 60s. After watching these clips, the researchers quickly realize they're all just a bunch of blue-collar slobs.
People, that's who we need for our next astronaut.
I suggest a lengthy, inefficient search at the taxpayer's expense, of course.
I wish there was an easier way.
Ring, and ring, then ring, almost if by miracle we get that answer calling to be answered. That was a confusing sentence, but Homer is the other person calling in, and of course he says, "Hello? Is this NASA?"
Yes.
Good. Listen, I'm sick of your boring space launches. Now I'm just an ordinary blue-collar slob, but I know what I likes on TV.
How did you get this number?
Shut up! And another thing, how come I can't get no tang round here? And also... and then we get another toilet flushes.
People, our long search is over.
We see that it's actually Homer calling from the payphone of Moe's, and he's not done yet because he actually calls up next. Hello? Is this President Clinton? Good! I figured if anyone knew where I could get some tang, it'd be you. Shut up!
Excuse me?
We then see the people that were on the phone yesterday from NASA actually walk into Moe's bar. Very fish out of water type of situation here. They go straight up to Homer, who's currently on the phone making these berating phone calls, and ask them straight up, "Are you the person that called NASA yesterday?"
No, it wasn't me. I swear, it was him.
They, of course, point to Barney, and this is where we truly get the start of our A-plot in so many ways, because it turns out NASA is actually looking for a blue-collar slob, and they're going to make that blue-collar slob an astronaut, a position that demands and commands respect. And, of course, that's exactly what Homer is looking for. So the scientists take advantage of the situation. One of them, for some reason, has like a billy club or like one of those black sock
like
things
a shoehorn or something.
Yeah, he knocks both Homer and Barney out, and they decide they'll just take them both.
That's after he asks Barney, "Sir, how would you like to get higher than you've ever been in your life?"
Be an astronaut? Sure.
Which, that joke kind of bothered me both times I watched this episode, because I felt like that was a perfect setup for some kind of weed joke, and then it seemed like they almost couldn't figure out a way to go with it, so they just had Barney straight up know what he was talking about.
I completely disagree. I think that joke is so much funnier because of the route they took it, not that they were just doing an easy setup joke.
I don't know, it just felt a little unnatural to me. But the part that I wanted to point out was when Homer was talking to President Clinton on the phone. Because my guidebook, The Simpsons, A Complete Guide to Our Favorite Family, questions if the little part Homer says where he goes, "I figured if there's anyone that knows where to get some tang, it would be you." My guidebook asks if it's a double entendre, and because it's Clinton, so like, why did he pick Clinton?
Because Clinton knows how to get that tang, baby.
Exactly. So I thought that was a really interesting question for a guidebook that was given to a kid to have proposed.
No, that is really interesting. It's a funny thing to be pointed out in specifically that guidebook. But it's a great question. It really does bring up a good question. It's more than likely just nonsense, because I think tang is known for, being a powdered beverage that they can take to space. However, the double entendre could easily be there, especially in 1994.
Well, he's asking if anyone knows where to get some tang, it would be you.
That's a great joke. So I think this is a good time to talk about a little bit of interesting information I learned from watching the commentary on this episode. And that is actually that this concept, this plot line, created a ton of beef between Dave Merkin and Matt Groening. They actually discuss very briefly, very jovially, and you can tell they've clearly made up since then. But at the time that this episode was being pitched and made, essentially, Matt Groening was adamant that this was taking things too far and this would destroy the series. He felt that the concept of taking Homer out of the planet and literally into outer space was just too much. And they did actually end up getting into several heated arguments where they had to ask the other writers to leave the room so they could basically hammer things out between the two of them. But it sounds like they both did so in a mature and responsible fashion without it getting ugly, fortunately, because that would have been tragic for what we know comes in season 6, continuing under Merkin's show-running era. But I just thought it was very interesting that Matt Groening was so adamantly against this, and they did in fact have to make some compromises. There was originally going to be a lot more goofy animation, kind of in the style where we see Homer's face transform, which Matt Groening also hates, by the way. But right here in this moment, when Homer and Barney got knocked out, they were actually going to do a Looney Tunes style a bit where they had like the stars or birdies or something and their eyes were kind of rolling around, and it was going to be much, much more cartoony. But one of the compromises that Dave Merkin made with Matt Groening is that he would really ground the rest of the episode in reality so that this one absurd thing of an ordinary Joe Blow going into space would seem like it was still set in our real world.
Well, and again, I said this at the beginning of the episode, and we talk about it almost on a weekly basis, where hindsight is a beautiful thing. And now, in this day and age, you can look back at this as one of the most loved episodes of The Simpsons. So that also helps a lot. You know, sports teams have players that fight all the time, but when you're winning, the fighting doesn't even seem like it even matters anymore. As long as you're winning, everything's great. And that's kind of how this is, I would say, where it's like, if the show would have gone downhill right after this episode, then there'd probably be some bad blood between them still. But again, this is one of the most beloved episodes of the series, probably.
Oh, it's a highly ranked episode, easily. It makes a ton of best episode of all time lists.
So that's going to help both men come to terms with the fact that they're okay with everything.
Absolutely. I also think it might help that they got great guests to actually do voices like the amazing Buzz Aldrin. But that's going to come later on in the second act. This does bring us to the end of our first, so let's go ahead and take a quick break, and we'll hear from our Podern family.
Every year, new TV shows get canceled. Some make it an entire season, and some don't even make it that far. I'm Ed, host of Unaired, where each week we review a show that was canceled with episodes left unaired, then pitch our ideas for what could have been future episodes of those shows. We've covered shows like Cavemen, the show based on the Geico Cavemen commercials, the ill-fated 2011 Wonder Woman pilot, a show called Look Well, where Adam West plays an aging TV detective who thinks he can solve real crimes, and many more. You can find us on iTunes, Google Play, unairedpodcast.com, or wherever you download podcasts. And remember, some things are better left unaired.
And now it's time for our favorite part of the show. What's that say? Ads and sponsorship. Ugh, this is gonna be a real nightmare. Okay, what do you got for me? Patreon.com? What the hell is that? And they just give us money for it? Oh, if only we had that around in the 70s. Make sure you ask your mommies and daddies to send money to Best Darn Diddly at patreon.com. So they can drive a dump truck full of money up to our houses. Uh-oh. I said the loud part quiet and the quiet part loud.
We come back from our break and start the opening of Act 2 with another ridiculous, silly bit. This time it's a parody of the Beverly Hillbillies, but Homer has his whole family on this car, everything stacked up, including Marge sitting on a rocking chair on top of the vehicle, much like Granny would in the show, and they are on their way to South Florida to visit Cape Canaveral.
Which was formerly Cape Kennedy and formerly Cape Arbuncle.
Yes, that's true, according to the sign outside the gate. The first thing on the agenda for Homer and Barney is to be introduced to the public. The NASA scientists are actually announcing that they are going to be taking this next flight a little bit differently than they have in the past. They've got a new ace up their sleeve, and they introduce both Homer and Barney to the press.
Ladies and gentlemen, and members of the press, I'd like to present the new generation of NASA astronauts, the average American.
We see Homer wearing a chef apron that says "Hail to the Chef," and Barney dressed as a golfer. We also see a series of reporters pop up to ask questions. The first one, Jim Wallace, Associated Press. Is this a joke?
Far from it, Jim. One of these men will prove space travel is within the reach of the common man.
Yes, Toby Hunter, Minneapolis Star. No, really, is this a joke?
No, Toby, and no more questions about whether this is a joke.
And everyone in the crowd puts their hands down. Another reporter does, however, to grill Homer. She actually starts by saying, yes, question for the barbecue chef. Don't you think there's an inherent danger in sending underqualified civilians into space? Homer's response here is absolutely fantastic because it's already been addressed to the one dressed as the chef.
I'll field this one. The only danger is if they send us to that terrible planet of the apes. Wait a minute. Statue of Liberty? That was our planet! You maniacs! You blew it up! Damn you! Damn you all to hell!
And you can actually see Homer break down on stage as he literally realizes the ending to the movie Planet of the Apes as he is fielding this question. And it traumatizes him clearly.
The way he says the last few parts that sounded to me just the way that Charlton Heston did it in the movie.
He did a great job impersonating it. It was fantastic. And of course, the animation once again goes hand in hand as Homer weeps is just a beautiful thing to watch on cartoon format.
Then it's all encapsulated by Barney burping and passing out.
These two definitely have the right... Wait, what's that stuff?
Thank you. That's all we have time for.
So the scientists now have to express just exactly what these two men are going to have to go through. And they need to know it's not going to be easy. There's going to be a series of grueling tests to determine which of the two of them is actually most qualified. And of course, during the duration of this training, there will be no beer.
What? 3 whole weeks with only wine? I'll go crazy.
I think Barney might be missing the point. Homer comes in and tells his buddy, and may the best man win. But then immediately whispers to the assistant, he's got a big drinking problem. Could embarrass the program. Meet me up in that tree later and I'll tell you more.
Like, it's extra funny because he says, meet me up in the tree. They could have put anything in there. He could have met him in the office.
Like, walk 12 feet this way.
Yeah. But it just sounds like a kid. Like, meet me in my clubhouse and we can talk.
It's a very childish manner that we see Homer in. And speaking of children, we see a scene next with him and his child, his oldest child. And it seems like Bart's opinion of Homer may have changed a little bit. Wow, my father, an astronaut. I feel so full of... What's the opposite of shame?
Pride?
No, not that far from shame.
Less shame?
Yeah. We also learn that Marge went through a very long list of emotions when she learned the news of her husband becoming an astronaut.
You know, Homer, when I found out about this, I went through a wide range of emotions. First I was nervous, then anxious, then wary, then apprehensive, then kind of sleepy, then worried, and then concerned. But now I realize that being a spaceman is something you have to do.
Who's doing what now? I think this is a very perfect example of how much thought, emotionally speaking, differ between men and women, because I know just with disagreements and whatnot with my wife, it's like, well, not even disagreements, just like analyzing a problem that we have to solve. I'm just like, all right, let's do this. And she goes through like the list of every possible bad thing that could happen with any given choice, like 27 steps ahead. And I'm just like, can we wait and see if anything goes wrong first, and then we'll plan for the worst when it gets to the worst? But again, I think that
I don't know if that's a reflection of the difference between men and women or a reflection of how your mind works.
Fair enough. I think that I find that to be a common trait with other married people I've talked to.
I have nothing to say because I'm not married.
So the next morning is when all of the training is going to begin. And we see Homer arriving right on time. And while he might not be drinking beer, he's definitely not giving up donuts.
Well, here I am, right on time. I don't see Barney. Let's crash the rocket into the White House and kill the president, Gumble.
I love that little bonus name he gives him there. The assistant, though, actually points out, he's been here since sunrise. And we see Barney in the back already working out. Hi, Homer. Since they made me stop drinking, I've regained my balance and diction. Observe. And he starts doing backflips and handsprings as he recites, I am the very model of a modern maiden general. I'm going to have a hard time with this one. I am the very model of a modern major general. I have information, vegetable, animal, and mineral.
Oh, that's nothing. Watch this. I once knew a man from Nantucket. Ah!
And after only like a half rotation on Homer's part, we see him immediately bail and crash into a wall.
If I remember correctly, when I was in high school, I was a big theater kid, and from part of my induction training, we had kind of like a hell week where you had a junior or senior, and you were the freshman or sophomore becoming an actual thespian, where they kind of put you through hell week, but it was never anything too terribly bad. And I think, if I remember correctly, one of the things I had to do was the speech that Barney does right here whenever somebody said a certain key phrase. But it was a little bit different from that, but it was also kind of similar. So I always very much enjoy this part, especially with the conclusion of Homer not saying it quite as fast and half-assed somersaulting himself straight into a wall. There's something very obviously comical about that, but it just kind of brings up those memories for me.
I just love how instantly Barney goes from slob to like pristine athlete, and that he isn't going through any like shaking or detox signs that he would totally be going through if he was in real life. Just stop drinking.
Well, he can still drink wine.
Only wine for 3 weeks. You're totally right.
He's weaning.
Fair enough. I guess whatever amount that is, it's the right amount. But for now, these men are going to be put through a series of tests. The first one is a test on centrifugal force. They're spinning around extremely fast, and this is another sequence that I pointed out that Matt Groening still, or at least at the time of the commentary, talks about how much he hates. But it still made David Merkin giggle, so I think that you can see the clear divide. Homer's face actually morphs into Popeye's face as he's spinning around super fast.
You know, I think I got to go with Groening on this one, man. There's something that's always felt off to me about that little moment. And, I understand the purpose of it and everything, but it just always... I never thought of The Simpsons of a show that had to do that kind of gimmick, with the exception of, Homer's face changing into Abe's face, which I feel is in a different context than what this was.
Yeah, it's definitely a different joke.
Yeah, it's something about it just feels slightly off to me. Not that it is bad, it just doesn't seem like it fits.
I don't think it ruins the episode, but I completely agree with what you just said in terms of it doesn't quite fit. And definitely they're going to do it again in a little while with Richard Nixon's face, and it's the exact same thing. Yeah. It just seems very pulled out of nothing, and sometimes those jokes are an absolute smash hit. In this case, I do think they fall a little bit flat, and I do think they kind of take away from that concept we talked about earlier, where I think it would have been better if they tried to make everything else as realistic as possible to make the extremity of Homer being in space at least slightly more plausible. But nonetheless, the joke made it, and that's just one of many tests. We also see they have to blow through a straw and see how high up they can raise these balls through a vat of water, essentially. Barney's doing pretty good, but when it pans out to see Homer, he's actually drinking the liquid inside the testing device.
Medicine-y.
And we even have to see him do battle hand to hand or with weapons, but they're facing each other in some futuristic space battle. We even see one of the assistants wager 400 quatlus on the newcomer.
That's a Star Trek reference.
I had written down, I need to ask Richie if this is a Star Trek reference, because I know you're a fan of that series. I am not, other than seeing the new ones. I don't have a lot of frame of reference for the older Star Trek, other than, the very obvious and what's made it to be relevant in pop culture. This scene has done it enough that I recognize that I thought it was a part of Star Trek. But Star Trek is something I know that is very near and dear to your heart, and I was going to say, didn't you just recently go on the Derailers podcast and actually talk a little bit about your love for Star Trek?
First of all, I gotta say, I am the first to admit that I am a nerd, but we've talked about this on the show numerous times. I don't consider myself a diehard Star Trek fan. I'm aware of Star Trek. I watched episodes here and there in the original series. I watched a lot of The Next Generation as a kid because my dad was watching it when we'd be going to sleep. So I would always ask him questions about it. My dad was the biggest diehard Star Trek fan that I can remember. And he's actually the one, again, in this episode that referenced, or that showed me the reference, saying this is from a famous Star Trek scene when Spock and Kirk had to fight, because it even has the same music in the background, the dun 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 dun. And
to be fair, I would have to guess that music is just so slightly different enough as to not infringe on the copyright of the song, but I don't know for certain. I'm not a lawyer.
But they even do something similar in Futurama with Fry and Zoidberg when they're having a fight on Zoidberg's planet. They do the same kind of music thing to it. So this is something that a lot of people, a lot of shows will dip into this well, but I don't remember a show doing it earlier than The Simpsons. I forgot what the original question was.
I tried to help you. I tried to set you up to plug the Derailers podcast there for a minute, but
who?
You took it a different direction. That's cool.
Yes, I talked about the possible new upcoming Star Trek movie with possible director Quentin Tarantino and possibly rated R. But that was on the Derailers. One more time. That was on the Derailers podcast. Thanks for having me on, guys. Sorry you're so Canadian.
I don't see what that has to do with this, but okay.
I just wanted to throw in a Canadian
definitely
plug.
Shout out to the Derailers and go and check them out, especially Richie's been on there. I've been on there. You'll have to dig through the archives for that one because it was a while ago. Hopefully we'll make a more recent appearance again soon, or for myself. But go and check Richie's conversation out. Lots of fun for you fellow nerds out there.
My first solo gig.
For now, we see Barney and Homer are going to get to meet the rest of the crew that one of them will be potentially going into space with.
Gentlemen, I'd like you to meet the two experienced astronauts who will accompany the winner into space. Race Bannon and Buzz Aldrin, the second man on the moon.
And of course, this Buzz Aldrin character is in fact voiced by the real-life Buzz Aldrin. And once again, in typical David Merkin fashion, Merkin had absolutely nothing but kind words to say about how incredibly fun and nice and great to work with Buzz Aldrin it was. In fact, there is a story he told about this joke that's coming up right here. When they introduce Buzz as the second man on the moon, he says, "Second comes right after first." Originally, this was going to be a different joke, and Merkin actually pitched several different versions that kind of had the same thing. Like, one of them was, "and first to take a soil sample," or something like that. Various things where it seemed like Buzz Aldrin was uncomfortable with the fact that he was second. But Merkin wanted to point out on the commentary that actually Buzz Aldrin was not only a badass and a hero, but he was just so down to earth, and he truly just seemed completely comfortable being the second man on the moon, which of course, who wouldn't be, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, he was actually worried that he offended Buzz during this, making these jokes at his expense to some degree, and he was somewhat mortified that a personal hero of his might think that, he was being rude, but he hopes that it was all done with a chuckle, and he thinks it was.
Well, that just shows you how down to earth Buzz must be, because he must have been such a nice guy that it made Merkin uncomfortable going,
right?
Just offend him?
Yeah.
He's not saying anything. He's not doing anything.
Oh God. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'll also mention the other member of the team, Race Bannon, who is a parody of the character Race Bannon, with two N's instead of a Y, who was a very popular character on the cartoon show Johnny Quest. Did you ever watch Johnny Quest?
I saw, when they redid it, I saw, half of an episode once. I was never a big Johnny Q guy.
I wasn't huge into it, but it did come on Saturday morning cartoons, and if I got up early enough, I would usually watch it, because, cartoons are better than anything else on.
Wasn't that one of the, super early cartoons, though?
It was one of the very early cartoons, so I didn't watch it on a weekly basis. It would only be on the occasions where I woke up early enough, and if I, was already awake, I'd turn it on, because I used to love Saturday morning cartoons, as every kid our age did.
You had to be in that 10 to noon block on Saturday morning cartoons, or else you were missing out on prime viewership.
Don't sleep on 9 o'clock either. There was some good shows that came on that 9 o'clock hour, but anything before 7 or 8 was pretty hard to keep up with.
Speaking of keeping up.
So Buzz and Race are starting to get to know their possible new allies in space. They say they actually hear Barney is really kicking ass. But Homer wants to point out that the contest isn't over yet.
I don't think this contest is over yet, Buzz, if that is your real name. I believe there is still a little something called the swimsuit competition.
There's no swimsuit competition, Homer.
You mean I shaved my bikini zone for nothing?
Oh boy. Honestly, trying to not picture Homer shaving his bikini zone is really difficult.
Do, 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 do. You're welcome for that.
Thank you for that. Finally, the big day arrives, and we're going to actually learn who is going to be the man that gets to go into space.
Gentlemen, you've both worked very hard. And in a way, you're both winners. But in another more accurate way, Barney is the winner.
Congratulations, Barney.
That's very gracious of you, Homer. Please join us in a toast. To the mission!
And they all grab a glass and take a sip, only things don't quite go right, because as soon as it touches Barney's lips, he declares, "It begins!" And he starts guzzling and chugging the bottle. The scientists immediately start to try to restrain Barney, but he is out of control at this point, and he is drunkenly yodeling and running through the field. Essentially, he's eliminating himself from this competition.
Well, it has to be absurdistly large outbursts, or else it's not going to be enough to get him kicked off over Homer, so it all makes sense. Do, 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 do.
He actually ends up getting himself strapped to a rocket as it blasts off, and it sends him hurtling over the fence, and directly, fortunately for his sake, he lands in a pillow factory.
Did you say in?
Oh, I meant on, because the roof doesn't give, and he just bounces across the top of it. It gets better, though, because he's eventually going to wind up landing in the back of a marshmallow truck.
In the back of?
I absolutely love the response there. Of course, the funny part here, he's bouncing off the hardest parts of the factory and delivery system for some very soft things. I mentioned it at the top of the show. I'll actually point out real quick that building that Barney bounced off of, the Pillow Factory, is actually once again drawn to look like their former animation company, Class B Supo.
Oh.
But yes, after bouncing off the roof, Barney actually hits the ground, gets ran over by a marshmallow truck.
The softest truck of them all.
That's right.
A pound of marshmallows is a lot less than a pound of bowling balls.
The best part, though, of this whole thing is after this outcry from Barney and him eliminating himself, essentially, the assistant points out, "I don't understand it. That was non-alcoholic champagne."
One of the best jokes in the episode.
But not quite as good as this one coming up right here, in my opinion.
Yes. Well, Homer, I guess you're the winner by default.
Default? Woo! The two sweetest words in the English language. Default! 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 The assistant then immediately clubs him once again, knocking Homer out and rendering him silent.
Where did you get that anyway?
Sent away.
I really like those jokes throughout the whole episode where he always threatens to hit somebody when they're not paying attention.
Yeah, there's several times where he kind of pulls that thing out. And yeah, it's just comical because, it's the type of thing you might see used in like a 1930s mob movie.
When you were saying earlier that might have been too dark for graining at the get-go of the episode, but it's literally one of my favorite gags, if not my favorite gag in the episode, outside of the rod.
Bless that rod. He's a hero. But with Homer knocked out by the scientists, that does bring us to the end of our second act. So we're going to go ahead and take another quick break, but we will be right back.
What up, everybody? This your boy B-Rob, the host of the Random Ramblers with Rob podcast, to where we have random guests and we have random conversation. I don't know why we're saying we, because it's just me, but I guess it's we in the sense that I have a guest weekly, airs every Sunday and everything. So I guess it's we like that. We French. So check it out. Go to randomrobcast.com or check me out on Instagram at Random Ramblers with Rob, or Twitter at It's B-Rob, ITSBROB. Whoa.
back from the break to start Act 3. You know what, man? I'm actually getting kind of tired of talking about The Simpsons. You think we could talk about a different show for a while?
They fight and bites. They fight and fight and bites. Fight, 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 bite, bite, bites. This is the Itchy and Scratchy Show.
And we get yet another Star Trek reference in this episode, as we see this episode is going to be Scar Trek, the next laceration. And isn't it just amazing how these Itchy and Scratchy episodes always seem to relate to exactly what the Simpsons are going through?
It's like real life, man. I mean, every time I see one of our podcasts come out, I see memes all over Facebook from other Simpsons quoting sites that are talking about the same episodes that we are currently reviewing that haven't even aired yet.
Yeah, it is funny how that happens. I'll give you that. And I will also say, in this case, it would make total sense that it would be national news that an average Joe is going into space. So it would make a lot of sense that even if they didn't have one planned, Itchy and Scratchy would probably make plans to, make a space episode.
Yeah, but the fact that it comes out at the exact same time, that means they would have had to make the episode 18 months earlier or 9 months earlier? Or 6 days earlier if it's South Park?
I actually really love the joke that this whole episode builds towards, too, because, of course, in traditional Itchy and Scratchy fashion, they absolutely maul each other. They cut Scratchy into little tiny pieces and eventually explode his head by removing his space helmet. And the kids, Bart and Lisa, are absolutely dying in laughter during this whole thing. My favorite part is at the very end of the episode, the announcer comes on and there's a warning screen saying, "The preceding program contains scenes of extreme violence and should not have been viewed by young children."
Which, why is it at the end and not at the beginning?
That's the joke. And once again, Lisa and Bart are just cackling through this whole thing, but you get a cutout and we see Homer, who looks absolutely terrified because, of course, he will himself be going into space all too soon.
He's profusely sweating.
It's actually really impressive the way that they drew his armpit sweat, in my opinion. I know that's a weird thing to notice, but, honestly, the animation there was really good.
That armpit sweat.
We then see Homer in his spacesuit walking side by side with Race and Buzz. They're striding down the hall, approaching the space shuttle. But as it comes
slow-mo, every movie ever made about space.
Well,
travel.
and you know what? This is a good time to point out just how amazing the animation was in this episode. We've talked about the evolution of animation coming from the earlier seasons, but it seems like even a little bit more than the episodes we've recently seen. There are just some absolute amazing, I would say they're downright glorious shots that you could take from this episode that are just beautiful.
Wrestling?
Yes, but seriously.
I caught it. I caught on. I know one thing, that whenever you pause and quote something and you put that much into it, and if I don't recognize it, I know it's not The Simpsons, so it's probably wrestling. It's a 50-50 shot.
That's pretty much the odds, yes. But yeah, I mean, honestly though, the animation stills, there are some just amazing, beautiful stills even, and just the way this whole, especially when they get into space, there are just some beautiful shots, and I will say that the slow-mo down the hall is absolutely one of them.
Oh, especially when you get the added dialogue in it with Homer turning.
Yeah, Homer is realizing that maybe space travel isn't going to be for him after all.
Can you blame him? That's got to be a terrifying feeling, being an average Joe.
I mean, if I got the opportunity to go to space, I wouldn't say no.
But see, this is one of those situations that you talked about earlier with you and your wife, where if it's me, I'm okay, well, what happens if my insulin breaks when I'm in space? How much insulin do I get to take? What about food? What if I get shaky? What if something goes wrong? That's the kind of shit that I would be thinking about the whole time.
Just have some Tang and shut the fuck up and enjoy life, man.
If I was getting some Tang up in space, hell yeah. Is that the 3 Mile High Club? What would that be?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I think you're going to need a bigger ruler. If you're lucky.
Whoa!
For now, though, Homer goes where he always goes when he needs comfort. In this case, he actually calls Marge on the phone, and he just breaks it down to her. Marge, I don't really know if I want to go through with this, but being an astronaut is how I got you to respect me.
Homer, when I met you, you weren't an astronaut. You didn't even know how to use a touchstone. But I still respected you, and I always will, no matter what.
Beep, 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 beep.
Homer, you already dialed. I loved that bit. But on the other hand, when you don't take advantage of an opportunity, you can end up regretting it for the rest of your life.
Boom. Truer words have never been spoken. But for
So
now,
go to space without insulin.
Homer realizes, though, you're right, Marge. Just like that time I could have met Mr. T at the mall. The entire day I kept thinking, I'll go a little later. I'll go a little later. And then when I got there, they told me he just left. And when I asked the mall guy if he would ever come back again, he said he didn't know. Well, I'm never going to let something like that happen again. I'm going into space right now.
Oh, I am so proud of you, and I know it's going to go just fine.
Beep, 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 beep.
I just can't get over that. I'm sorry, I just love that moment.
It's a great moment. Homer is such an idiot, but he's so lovable at the same time. I will point out a quick fact from IMDb that the line with Mr. T is actually changed for its Spanish translation, and they actually say that Homer was going to meet Rambo. I guess Mr. T wasn't all that popular in the Spanish-speaking nations.
Senor Tay?
Yeah, exactly. So, it sounds a little too close to Senor Tang.
It sounds a little close to Senor Chang.
Oh, I love Community. There's our one reference per episode, folks, if you're keeping track.
Boom, we'll always work it in, just for you.
And wrestling.
Pop, pop.
Pop, pop. So Homer is back with his space crew. They are all locked and loaded, ready to launch this rocket. They start their initiation system. They're going through all their launch sequences and just making sure that everything is ready to go. And they actually ask Mission Control, request permission to sedate cargo ahead of schedule, referring, of course, to Homer.
He's already like, are we there yet? I'm thirsty.
Permission denied. Then they're going over their final checklist. They say payload, IRS surveillance satellite.
Check.
Ant farm.
Check.
Children's letters to God.
Check.
And you actually see a canister filled with children's letters to the Invincible Man upstairs.
But it literally says on the canister, children's letters to God to jettison.
Yeah, they're just going to throw him out into space. Maybe Bender will float along one day and pick him up.
That would be a cool little segue into Futurama there.
That's a fun one, yeah.
When you do things just right, it'll seem like you haven't done anything at all.
Exactly. It's beautiful, man. Did you write that yourself?
Yes, and then I gave it to the writers of Futurama. They still haven't paid me.
We then get that second sequence that Matt Groening absolutely hates, and Richie and I have both already said, kind of takes you a little bit out of it, though you can still see why it's funny. They are going to lift off, and first of all, this is absolutely the best countdown ever. 3, 2, 1, make rocket go now.
Another 3 seconds just to say it.
And then as it lifts off, we then see through the G-force, that is when Homer's face kind of briefly turns into Richard Nixon.
Go, Dad, go!
The Simpsons family is back in their home and they're all rooting on their father. How doth the hero strong and brave a celestial path in the heavens pave?
Huh?
Literally the whole family just turns to Lisa and has no idea what she's saying, so she then just copies her brother. Go, Dad, go.
The thing is, Lisa put a lot of thought into that, and I kind of think it's kind of part of the 8-year-old in her wanting a little bit of attention, but at the same time, proud of Homer. So, she's trying to show her smarts off a little bit and kind of gets put in her place. That's a kind of fucked up way of thinking, but I've just always seen that scene in that way.
I could see that. That makes a lot of sense.
It makes it more funny to me. Go, Dad, go.
It's a great way to think about it. But her reading on that, Yeardley is able to do, that beautiful quote that she does, and then just so solemnly, go, Dad, go.
If she was a part of like almost any other family, she would get so much more recognition for who she is.
She really would. It's almost sad. We see back at Mission Control, things are going much better for them with this launch. Sir, the TV ratings for the launch are the highest in 10 years. Yay!
And how's the spacecraft doing?
I don't know. All this equipment is just used to measure TV ratings. That actually might be my favorite joke in the whole episode, because it's showing the NASA control room where you've seen in the video archives, or if you've ever watched Apollo 13, all of those massive computers and the screens, all of course to communicate and help control the rocket. But in this case, it's NASA is admitting that they are just for television ratings tracking.
I know we'll probably touch on it just briefly, but don't you feel like we need to start putting some money back into the space program, Miles?
I don't know how I feel about the space program, Richie. I mean, that seems like a lot of money to go out into space, and I guess there could be reasons to go, but at this point, it seems like we should just, send rovers or robots or whatever to all the places that we haven't already discovered or studied, and just kind of let it go from there. Unless you're trying to colonize the moon, I really don't see the purpose of sending people into space at this point.
Yeah, but when there's people like members of NSYNC that have millions of dollars that are willing to pay to go up into space, I feel like there's a part of it that might pay for itself. I mean, you're not going to get up into space unless NASA's around.
If there's ever a contest to be an average Joe who gets to go into space, I'll totally sign up. But at the same time, I'm not sure how comfortable my tax dollars are going towards that.
They lie on all those numbers anyways.
If the independently wealthy, like NSYNC, whoever you said it was, wants to fund trips to space, then I'm all for it.
You could record a show live from space.
That's it. It's probably the next era of reality television.
Oh, no.
In space. And then after that, if it follows horror movie rules, they'll have to go to the ghetto. And then where else? They'll have to
go back to the ghetto a second time.
Back to the ghetto a second time is important. That's right. Deeper space, they can go there.
And then back to where it all first started.
Hell, exactly.
I meant like back to the original place from the first movie, like the 8th movie. But yeah, that too.
So for now,
we should write movies.
We really should. For now, though, we see Homer getting to take in an awe-inspiring view. All the way from outer space, he decries, "It's beautiful. It's the most awe-inspiring sight I've ever seen. Giver of life, mother of us all. Hey guys, look what I smuggled aboard." And he pulls out a bag of potato chips.
Homer, no!
But it's too late, because of course, Homer's immediately already popped and he can't stop. But in zero gravity, those chips are just flying all over the cabin and potentially going to cause a lot of problems for the equipment on board.
They'll clog the instruments.
Buzz is worried. Careful, they're ruffled. But Homer has the solution. And if you have never seen this episode, you have seen this sequence. I almost guarantee it, because this is where we see Homer in zero gravity to the beautiful classical music. I believe it's I had it written down. It's the Blue Danube Waltz. He floats about the cabin, munching on the chips, spinning around in just this glorious manner. It's a fantastic scene. And it's all going great until Homer is on a collision course and unable to stop himself with the ant colony that is on board.
By far, to this point in my mind, the best animation sequence that we have seen on the series.
Yes, without a doubt.
It looks like it's a preamble to the 3D aspect of how Futurama will look, because you see these ruffled chips all over the shuttle. And like the chip spinning from that camera angle, and then it switches to Homer spinning, and they're both spinning opposite directions. And you never lose sight of what exactly is going on. It's so beautifully drawn.
It really is. I also love the little sequence we get in subtitles with the ant colony. They're yelling out, "Protect the Queen!"
Which one's the Queen?
I'm the Queen.
No, you're not.
All this is in subtitles, and just then Homer goes crashing in, head first into the ant colony, and all of the ants also, along with the chips, go flying around the cabin.
Freedom! Horrible, horrible freedom!
The ants are actually sad to be let loose. They were happy in their home. And Buzz Aldrin cries out, "You fool! Now we may never know if ants can be trained to sort tiny screws in space."
Which, let's be very clear about something. Anytime you try to train any kind of insect or animal in any kind of horror movie setting to be your worker slave, it never ends well.
It's never going to be your friend.
And it usually turns out that they're going to become radioactive or enlarged or, eat you.
Exactly. Fortunately for the men in space, the NASA controllers have arranged a special surprise for the astronauts. They have the legendary James Taylor in mission control just to wish them well and play a little bit of music. To be specific, a little bit of his own brand of laid-back adult contemporary music.
Wow, former President James Taylor.
I love that Homer confuses him with the president. That's fantastic. I will point out this was, in fact, voiced by James Taylor himself, and I'm going to have another fun fact for you about him here in just a moment. For now, though, Buzz Aldrin tells James Taylor, "With all due respect, Mr. Taylor, this isn't the best time for your unique brand of bittersweet folk rock. We have a potentially critical situation here. I'm sure you'll understand."
Listen, Aldrin, I'm not as laid back as people think. Now here's the deal. I'm going to play, and you're going to float there and like it. When you're down and troubled, and you need a helping hand, and nothing is going right.
We then cut to the news with Kent Brockman. We're just about to get our first pictures from inside the spacecraft with average not Homer Simpson. And we'd like to... As we see Kent Brockman start to panic when we see a close-up image of the space station or the space shuttle, and right in the camera is what seems to be ginormous mutant ant. Ah! Ladies and gentlemen, we've just lost the picture, but what we've seen speaks for itself. The Corvair spaceship has been taken over. Conquered, if you will, by a master race of giant space ants. It's difficult to tell from this vantage point whether they will consume the captive Earthmen or merely enslave them. One thing is for certain, there is no stopping them. The ants will soon be here. And I, for one, welcome our new insect overlords. I'd like to remind them that as a trusted TV personality, I can be helpful in rounding up others to toil in their underground sugar caves.
The part that gets me with this bit is there's this graphic that pops up behind Brockman with a giant slave with like a whip or something on a tiny human. And I want to know, how did they get that graphic up there that fast? Because that means they probably already had it in like stock pictures.
They're already prepared for all disasters.
Because it's as he's making the speech, it pops up, and that just always gets me.
So they might be overreacting just a little bit on Earth because there's not actually giant mutant ant overlords. But at the same time, these ants could legitimately cause some serious issues with their navigation system. For now, however, James Taylor just continues to sing to them, even though they've already requested they get some silence so they can think.
Sweet dreams and flying machines and pieces on the ground. Mm-hmm.
But he instantly realizes that might not be the message of hope the astronauts need right now, so he slightly alters the lyrics.
Sweet dreams and flying machines, flying safely through the air.
So, the first line was actually the lyrics to his song Fire and Rain, which, first of all, again, it seems like this is common with Merkin, but he legitimately gets people he really likes on the show, and he absolutely loves James Taylor as well. In fact, he was, once again, very nervous about rewriting his lyrics, even in just a subtle little way for the sake of the show, because he knew that the song Fire and Rain is actually very, very personal to James Taylor. That song was written about a friend that committed suicide, so he was worried that he might be offended by tampering with the lyrics. But David Merkin sent him the lyrics in advance, and he never heard anything back in terms of a complaint or any sort of hesitation at all. So on the day that James Taylor arrives and David Merkin is directing him, they go over the part where he sings his song the correct way many times. And when Merkin asked if he's ready to take a swing with the new lyrics, James Taylor had no idea there were new lyrics. He never got the message. So in an absolute moment of panic, Merkin had to present with him this idea of what they were going to do. And he was absolutely, according to himself, sweating bullets that James Taylor would just walk off set in a rage. But he actually took it in stride and he actually giggled when he read the line the first time. He was a great sport about it and he was absolutely willing to do so because he thought it made perfect sense for the episode's plot line.
One of those points where like it's so extreme and you're looking like Homer watching Itchy and Scratchy and it was just absolutely nothing, worried for nothing.
You know, I've said this before and I'm sure I'll say it again, but one of my favorite quotes of all time is simply, our minds always make things out to be a bigger deal than they actually are. And usually if we just go through with things and we just do what we need to do to get through life, usually things will kind of work themselves out in a lot of ways. I'm not saying like don't try or don't put effort into doing what you want to do.
It is the first step towards failure.
But at the same time, I am saying that people often choose to not do things because they work it up to be a much bigger deal in their head than it's actually going to be in real life.
But at the same time, like, this made a really good story. And I like the fact that these people like David Merkin and Matt Groening, people that we hold in high esteem and that you kind of glorify in ways, they have these truly human emotional moments where they're acting just like you and me. And I think that's totally awesome.
They have idols too, and they would be nervous to meet celebrities in the same fashion, even though they've met a lot of them. And I think that's really cool and humanizing. And that's a great thing to be able to connect with in terms of following these guys throughout the commentary and seeing the progression of these episodes as they're being made.
We're so smart, Miles.
SMRT.
I mean, SMART. Back to space.
While James Taylor is singing to the astronauts are struggling to figure out a way to solve the issue. I already mentioned the ruffled potato chips and the ants are now shorting out the navigation systems.
Ants, huh? We had quite a severe ant problem at the vineyard this year. I had Art Garfunkel come by with his compressor, and we created a total vacuum outside the house, and we blew the ants out the front door. But I'm sure you high-tech NASA people could care less about our resort town ways.
And that's James Taylor with the idea of the century that ends up saving the day. Of course, though, in the moment, the NASA assistants are just like, quiet you.
But he also puts up the shoehorn like he's going to hit James Taylor in the back of the head.
Yeah, that's right.
Wait a minute. This unkempt youngster might just be onto something.
I love the scientist refers to James Taylor as an unkempt youngster.
And then Homer's a dumbass again. And oh my god. I just can't anymore with him.
Well, to be fair, they come up with... Well, it's not even to be fair. I can't justify that. Yeah, Homer is absolutely the worst in terms of... I hate to say it, but Barney would have totally been better in this situation. They decide to use the vacuum idea by strapping themselves into their seats and opening the door to create a vacuum to suck everything out into space. Except for one little problem, because of course, Homer doesn't buckle his fucking seatbelt.
And he lets go too early.
He lets go while the suction is still happening, yeah.
And that is that.
He's able to manage to hold on to the spaceship's handle, but it's very clearly going to break sooner than later. Fortunately, the actual astronauts are able to save the day and save Homer's ass by pulling him back into the spaceship. Only they aren't properly able to latch the door anymore because Homer broke the handle. It starts to get a little bit heated as both Buzz and Race are getting mad at Homer, and Homer actually decides to get violent. He grabs that rod from the beginning, the inanimate carbon rod that got the weekly award from him, and he's trying to use it as a weapon. Only when he swings back and he kind of winds up to swing, he ends up accidentally latching the door closed and becomes the accidental hero.
I love his little speech beforehand where he's acting all scared until he grabs the rod and he's like, aha, now I'll bust that pretty face of yours. Oh, stupid bar.
Wait, Homer, if that bar holds, we just might make it back to Earth.
And then you get that moment where like Homer's thinking really hard for a second, and then he goes, "Oh, I'll bash you good," and he tries to grab it again.
He's still focused on just getting his ass whipping in, and he's actually trying to pry the rod out of the door at this point, which is, of course, the only thing that might save them.
That's actually my favorite part of the episode.
There's so many good ones. It's
yeah.
tough to say, but yeah, absolutely. Back on Earth, we see Kent Brockman again. Well, this reporter was possibly a little hasty earlier and would like to reaffirm his allegiance to this country and its human president. May not be perfect, but it's still the best government we have. For now.
Still relevant in today's society, right?
He then notices there's still a sign hanging behind him that says "Hail Ants," clearly made with a marker, so he tears that down too.
Like they understand English anyways.
Oh yes, and by the way, the spacecraft is still in extreme danger and may not make it back. Attempting risky re-entry, blah 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 blah. We'll see after the movie. Jeez. Between this and last week's episode, where he did a 30-minute news piece on Lisa Lionheart, and forgot to do the rest of the news, Kent Brockman might be the worst news anchor in the history of television.
I don't know. I don't think he has any sexual harassment things against him, and pretty much every other one does, so.
Yeah, that's true. It's hard these days to find anybody who doesn't, unfortunately. Sad world we live in, but The Simpsons is still fantastic. And the Simpsons family is still rooting on their father as he is attempting re-entry. I love that while everybody is kind of humming and reassuring themselves, let's see, Buzz and Race are humming the battle hymn of the Republic, but Homer instead decides that he prefers the Golden Grams jingle to calm him down.
Oh, those Golden Grams. Oh, those Golden Grams. Crispy, crunchy graham cereal, brand new breakfast treat.
Like I mentioned, Lisa and actually Abe are cheering on Homer to make it back. Lisa's like, "Come on, Dad, you can make it."
Oh, of course he'll make it. It's TV.
Great little meta joke there. And of course, Abe is correct. The spaceship does land back on Earth, though it has a very abrupt stop. It actually conveniently lands at the building where all the press is for the post-landing interviews. On the commentary, they did admit that this was somewhat of a last-minute change because it was running long on time, and they just needed a very quick way to get Homer into this press conference.
I thought it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, totally. So Homer and the crew are being questioned by the press. One of them stands up and says, "How'd you solve the door dilemma?"
Homer Simpson was the real hero here. He jury-rigged the door closed using this.
And of course, Buzz Aldrin holds up that inanimate carbon rod, and the crowd goes crazy. "Hey, what's that?"
It's an inanimate carbon rod.
Yay!
Isn't Homer holding it up? Because I think that's kind of the joke here is like it ends up on the magazine cover, but like Homer's so close to being on it.
It's his hand. Yeah, it's on Time magazine, and it says, "In Rod we trust." They even organize a parade, an actual parade where they have the rod sitting in the backseat of a convertible to be driven around town so everyone can see it. And this, of course, flashes into the Simpsons' living room when Homer turns off the parade on television.
Aw, they were just about to show some close-ups of the rod.
Oh, stupid Rod, I got gypped.
Oh, homie, you should be proud. Only a handful of people have done what you've done.
Yeah, Dad. How many people have seen the ice caps and the deserts all at once? Or the majesty of the northern lights from 100 miles above?
Yeah, maybe I do have the right. What's that stuff?
Oh, I love that. The right stuff. That's great. The ending sequence here is also just fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. A good little callback to the beginning of the ep.
It's a great callback. It's both funny and it's also really, really sweet in terms of the relationship with Bart and Homer. We often talk about how they're only able to really have so much sweetness or tenderness between the two based on who the characters are. But this is the perfect amount to demonstrate just how there really is a bond between Bart and Homer at times. Everyone is, of course, praising Homer, and when Bart is asked if he has anything to say, Bart just responds, he knows how I feel about him, but it shows that he had just gotten done writing hero on the back of Homer's skull instead of insert brain here like he had earlier in the episode.
Aww.
And then Bart tosses the marker into the air, and we get a very surreal ending as the marker turns into a Fox satellite, and that satellite is floating in space. And in space, we see a baby Homer, and that Fox satellite crashes into it, and we get a little baby doe. Aww. This is, of course, a reference to 2001, A Space Odyssey. Something that the Simpsons creators all love to reference very, very often. This is probably the 5th or 6th time already in just these 5 seasons we've seen this. But this is a really great reference with it being little baby Homer instead of the fetus in space like we see at the end of the movie.
You learned something today on the Best Darn Diddly Review show.
That's always the goal. We want to make you laugh and make you learn.
Oh.
That does bring us to the
I was
end
trying
of
to come up with a raw joke, but I couldn't.
And that does bring us to the end of Act 3 and the end of the episode. Richie, is there anything else you'd like to point out or anything that your book would like to point out about this episode before we get out of here?
I do want to point out 2 things about my book. Once again, if you forgot the name, even though we say it in every episode, it's The Simpsons, A Complete Guide to Your... I forgot the name of it. It's The Simpsons, A Complete Guide to Our Favorite Family. On each episode, there's like a spotlight character on the margins that it has stats for. 2 weeks ago, it was Apu. Last week, it was Stacy Lavelle, the Malibu Stacy creator. And they always have different Simpsons character. The one for this week is the inanimate carbon rod.
That's perfect.
I just thought it was funny because it has like all these little stats about that, like it's the color green and that it's making the cover of Time magazine was its greatest honor. So I thought that was great. The other thing I wanted to point out about the actual episode, according to the guidebook, is that the space shuttle is named Corvair, and the Chevrolet Corvair of the 1960s was judged to be one of the road's most unsafe cars. So they named the space shuttle after one of the most unsafe vehicles. So I thought that was a cool little insider information bit there. But other than that, I kind of hinted at this earlier in the episode. This episode's still really, really funny, and I still very much enjoy it. But coming into the season, I thought for sure this one would be my favorite episode. I really did. And I just want to say at this point, I still think Boy Scouts in the Hood is by far a better episode.
It would be hard to argue with Boy Scouts in the Hood at this point. I will say, as usual, I'm probably going to have a very tough time with my top 5. This one, I for sure thought was going to be close to the top of that one. And now I will say that it might be fighting for one of the competitive spots in that top 5 ranking. It's still a great episode. It's just, there are so many great episodes. They can't all win.
Dude, I'm nervous about next week. I think next week's episode is something that I might not have enjoyed so much as a kid, but I'm worried it might be my favorite episode of the season. I don't know.
I don't know why you'd be worried about that. That's an exciting thing. You should be looking forward to next week if that were the case.
I don't want to have as hard of a time as you do coming up with the list, okay?
Welcome to my hell. So I will go ahead and point out this episode, as we just said, is absolutely amazing. And it does have one special thing about it that no other episode of The Simpsons has. There is actually a copy of this episode that was specially made by Dave Merkin. It was put on DVD specifically to be sent to the International Space Station, where it still resides. And while astronauts are spending time in the International Space Station from all over the world, they can actually enjoy the episode Deep Space Homer.
That's awesome. So they're in the International Space Station and they're in the Baseball Hall of Fame?
They are literally all over the galaxy and expanding to the universe, I'm certain. But speaking of expanding to the universe, that's not the only place The Simpsons resides in space. Mark Kirkland, who actually had absolutely nothing to do with the creation of this episode. I mean, he was on staff, but he didn't actually specifically work on this episode like they usually will have the people in the commentary that were more directly tied in with this. He was on the commentary specifically to share this story. He visited the Jet Propulsion Labs family weekend in the early 90s, and one of the exhibits they had was actually a booth where you could go and sign your name, and they were going to digitize all of the signatures, put them on a microchip, which I'm sure was like the size of like a old cell phone at this point, not as tiny as they are now. Yeah, it's probably huge, but long story short, it was a chip that they were going to put on the Mars rover so that there would be a copy of all these names from Earth circling around on Mars. Mark Kirkland actually approached this booth, explained who he was, and asked if he could draw a picture to go in its place. They agreed, and they were actually ecstatic to have it. And he drew a quick drawing of Homer J. Simpson, and that drawing is still on that rover in Mars, assuming it hasn't been abducted or stolen by Martians to this day.
So that's why we haven't found alien life. They saw that drawing and ran away terrified.
This is what humanity is? I'm out. Fuck that. Go. So I think that is going to do it for this week's Best Darn Diddly Review show. Richie, where can they find you online?
As always, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at theWiz_kid23. Also, while you're on Twitter, go ahead and give our show a follow as well. That's at Best Darn Diddly. That's DIDDLY. That also works on Instagram and YouTube as well. So make sure you follow us all over social media.
And I am at MrMostDaysOff. That'll also work pretty much everywhere. I also want to talk real quick about a book that's going to be coming out soon. It's Springfield Confidential, Jokes, Secrets, and Outright Lies from a Lifetime Writing for The Simpsons. This book is going to be available on June 12th, 2018 through HarperCollins Publishing, and you can actually find that on Amazon right now. The reason I'm talking about this book, other than the fact that it relates to The Simpsons, it was actually written by our very own friend of the show and former and upcoming guest, Matthew Klickstein. Matthew Klickstein got the opportunity to sit down with Mike Reese, who you will all recognize as one of the creators and showrunners from the previous seasons, and he got the opportunity to interview him and share a bunch of stories to put into this book that will be available very soon. So make sure you get on Amazon and pre-order that, support our guest, and support all of The Simpsons by pouring more money into the machine.
Woohoo?
Woohoo indeed. But seriously, check out Springfield Confidential, Jokes, Secrets, and Outright Lies from a Lifetime Writing for The Simpsons. I cannot wait to get a copy. We're definitely going to be talking more about that on the show, and we'll definitely be having Matthew Klickstein on again to talk about it himself, so look forward to that.
That's exciting stuff.
It is exciting stuff. Other than that, as always, the WizKid and I just want to thank you so much for tuning in to the Best Darn Diddly Review show. We appreciate you going on this journey through Simpsons history with us. We will, of course, be back next week to review the episode that apparently has Richie shaking in his boots. We're going to be talking about Homer Loves Flanders.
And remember, we are the very model of a modern Major General. We're information, vegetable, animal, and mineral.
And until next time, be cromulent to each other.
Hi, I'm Drew.
I'm Nate.
And I'm Tanner, and we are the hosts of Headline Heroes.
Every week we take a bizarre, out-there article,
Germans build underground pipeline for beer,
and attempt to create a superhero or villain.
The obvious one is that they have a giant robot that runs off of beer.
Along the way, we discuss powers, design a costume, and of course, struggle with a name.
Graham Sam? No.
Graham Sam, no!
And inevitably, we get off subject and talk about the really important stuff.
I did go to Bill Engvall's website, and I just want to tell you a couple of things I'm seeing here.
Please do, I wish you would. But we always arrive with the super creation we are proud of. Join Headline Heroes every Tuesday as we try to make reality a little more super.